just got to get myself together here this morning. I don't know about you, but when I think about the words of that last song we sang, I just can't understand why everyone doesn't want Jesus. I don't understand why the church, Big C, Universal, doesn't get more excited about this glorious thing that we call Christianity and salvation. I don't understand why it's so easy for us to focus on things in our life, whether we're part of the church or whether we're not part of the church, that would take away from who God really is. I don't understand why anyone would want to live this life leaving anything for the next. Because the next is so much bigger. The next is so much more of what God created for us to be. That moment of resurrection, that moment when God makes everything right, that moment when we live in the life that we were supposed to live from the very beginning. We have this message in Christianity that Jesus can come and He can save you and He can take away your sins and He can help you to live the life that you were meant to live. And yet so many of us live less than that life. So we've been talking about all these last few weeks and in this idea of the last arrow. Making sure that when we pass over from this life to the next, that our quiver is empty. And that means if we're going to shoot our arrows, we've got to be able to come together as a body of Christ and to do what it is that God has called us to do. And we can do it because we're unshackled. Amen? The world tries to shackle you. The rest of the world tries to tell you what you can and cannot do. The rest of the world tries to control you. And what we've tended to do is we've taken that idea of the world, and some of us have put that on the church. And some of us said, man, this is the job of the church. The church is supposed to tell you what to do. The church is supposed to do this, and the church is supposed to do that. But the problem with that is when you see the church as an institution instead of a movement, then the church does become that thing that you own because you pay tithe. Then the church does become that thing that you own because this is just where you've gone your entire life. When the church is simply an institution, it loses its power. Amen? And I'm just going to tell you something. God hasn't lost His power. The church has not lost its power. The institution never had it. And that's what it is to be the people of God is to be part of a movement, not part of an institution. And don't get me wrong, I love the Church of the Nazarene as an institution. For any general superintendent watching live streaming, I really do. But the truth of the matter is I would rather have the power of the church. And that can ruffle feathers. That can make people uncomfortable. Because when we rely on the power of God instead of the power of the institution, we can no longer control what happens. I have to admit to you, this is one of those sad times in life where you get a pastor authenticity moment. I can't even pronounce it. This is so hard for me to admit to you. At one time, I was a Grey's Anatomy fan. If you don't know what Grey's Anatomy is, good for you. You didn't get sucked into that show. But early on in that show, if you don't know what it was a show. It's a medical drama, and it started with a group of medical students, and they were all individuals. And so at the very beginning, you saw how they would compete against each other, and so they would do whatever they could to get a step up on the other person, and so they would cut in front of them for surgeries. They would lie about them. Some of them would even sleep with other people. I mean, it was not stuff that you would expect that your pastor would watch on television, but it just sucked me in because I'm looking at these people, these individuals, and I'm thinking, how can anybody be so horrible? You know, and how could anybody be so terrible? And then as I watched it, I watched this dynamic change from a group of people, though, who were individuals, and they kind of followed them all the way until they became full-fledged doctors, and you just kind of watch the relationships change from cutthroat to unhealthy ambition to understanding that they needed each other. I mean, they even had some of the most ridiculous, dramatic moments in TV history. I mean, and after about the 100th plane crash where 10 people died, I had to stop watching it. And what happened, though, is even through all of that, and even the drama and all the other stuff didn't really pull me in. What pulled me in was this relationship building that took place, where they started referring to each other as, "You're my person." From "I don't need anyone, I just need to climb to the top," to "You're my person. You were the only other survivor of the plane crash with me. You were the one that was with me through the active shooter scene. You were the one that was with me when my husband cheated with my sister. You were the one that was with me when I lost that patient because I dropped a cell phone in him. You were that one. You were my person. You were my person when my life fell apart. And everything that used to make sense to me no longer makes sense." And so that's kind of what drew me in. And as I look at that relationship and I think about the church, and I think about the fact that if the church could understand that we are each other's people, that we don't own anything, that we don't really come because we need a place to escape from the world, but we are a group of people that are a part of a movement that's going to go out and it's going to do something terribly incredible. But I'm afraid that the church, Big C in the United States of America, has lost this idea that we actually need each other. Can you believe there are people in other churches that get upset because things don't go their way and they leave to find another group of people? Can you believe that there are people in other churches who go and they don't like the things that are going on, and so they withhold tithe and they say, "You know what, I'm going to give my tithe whenever they start doing what I think they should do"? Can you believe there are people in other churches who instead of coming and connecting with people of different generations say, "Man, it's my way or the highway"? Can you believe there are people in other churches who don't understand the concept that they need people? And they're miserable. And they go from place to place, and they're trying to find their people, when really what they're trying to do is find people that'll listen to them and will do what they say. Because by golly, I give my money, I come to church, I do everything that I'm supposed to do. And so I'm owed, God. I'm owed. And we forget that we owe God. This thought would have been so foreign to the early church, that the church existed to serve me. The early church would have been so foreign to them that they would not have even been able to process it. You see, all they understood was this, that they were part of a movement, that Jesus Christ came and he unshackled them with his death and his resurrection, and the rest of the world didn't understand what was going on with Jesus, and so they were persecuting this group of people, this movement, this church. And the idea that people would leave one people and go to another people because they didn't get their way was foreign to them. They needed people. If nothing else, they needed people to die with in the Colosseums so that they weren't alone. If nothing else, they needed people to have fruit thrown at them as they spoke the truth to other people. If nothing else, they needed people that they could call their people. When everything around them didn't make sense. All they knew is they were part of a movement of God. And that in order to fulfill that mission, they needed each other. Because they were all focused on the same thing. You see, once you find your person or your people, see, in order to solidify those relationships, you gotta stand with them. You gotta stand with them even when it doesn't seem to fit your paradigm. You gotta stand with them even when it doesn't seem like you're gonna get anything out of the deal. You got to stand with them, and you got to be the people of God together. You see, this is such an elementary truth that we often tune it out, but there are people who just seem to always be at odds with each other all of the time. And when they're at odds with each other, they can never really have any kind of progress. If you're part of the military, you understand this concept. If you were part of high-level athletics, you understand this concept. If you are part of a church that's thriving and growing and making inroads into the community for Jesus Christ, you understand this concept. You see, because there are a lot of different ways to develop a battle plan. There are a lot of different ways to run a play. There are a lot of different ways to reach a lost and dying generation. There are a lot of different ways to do all of those things. And having been a coach, and I can speak to this idea of sometimes on the sidelines, when you see those coaches and they're yelling, they're screaming at each other, you automatically think that they don't like each other. They love each other. They just have this mission. And they're arguing about what play to call. But when the play is called, everybody tries to make that play a success. I don't have any military background, but my guess is it's somewhat similar. If you're in the heat of battle, and there are a lot of different places that you can go, a lot of different things that you can do. You can argue, you can talk a little bit. I was even reading a book about that, where there are a lot of different things you could do, and everybody doesn't always agree. But then they look to the leader, and the leader says, "This is where we're going to go." Then all the other stuff doesn't matter anymore. They understand the concept of people. It's their person. So they're going to go to war with. That's who they're going to die for. Even if it doesn't always positively influence their life. You see, we need to choose our people. And we need to stand with them against overwhelming odds. Because you see, no matter how independent you think you are, there comes a day where you realize you need people. And when we choose God's people for our lives, there's no shortage of joy. There's no shortage of joy and authenticity in life. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at Ruth. We're going to look at the whole book, but I'm just going to read you Ruth chapter 1. Actually, I'm only going to read you verses 6 through 19. I'm not going to read verses 1 through 19. But Ruth is one of those books that we kind of ignore until Mother's Day. And the reason we do is because it's Ruth. It's named after a woman, so let's preach it on Mom's Day, right? And so it's only about 4 or 5 chapters long, and so it's not very long. So I would encourage you, when we're done here today, if you have an opportunity, I want you to read the book of Ruth. Don't take my word, because you're getting the very short, Scott-approved paraphrase of the entire book as we kind of walk through this. But just to kind of set you up, you had these 3 women. You had Ruth, you had Naomi, and you had Orpah. Naomi was the eldest. She was from Judah. She was an Israelite. Her and her husband moved from Judah to Moab. Moab was the happening place. It was the place where everything was taking place, and people were getting rich in Moab. And so they decided they were going to go out, and they were going to stake their fortune. And so they moved there. They had children. They had 2 boys, and the boys married Orpah and Ruth. Well, as time went on, men died much, much, much earlier than women. And so here we are with these 3 women. You're with Ruth, you're with Naomi, and you're with Orpah. All their husbands are gone. And so Ruth and Orpah are Moabites. You could say they're with their people. Naomi is not. She's from somewhere else. And she hears through the grapevine that Judah is now the place to be. Naomi's people are in Judah. Her flesh and blood, the ones that she can depend on to take care of her. And so they travel. And they get to a place right before they get ready to cross from Moab into Judah. And that's kind of where we pick up the story in verse 6. It says, Then Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had blessed his people in Judah by giving them good crops again. So Naomi and her daughter-in-laws got ready to leave Moab to return to her homeland. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she set out from the place where she had been living, and they took to the road that would lead them back to Judah. But on the way, Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, Go back to your mother's homes, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and to me. May the Lord bless you with security and another marriage, or of another marriage. And she kissed them goodbye, and they all broke down and wept. We don't know much about Naomi, other than she was married to Abimelech. But this scene right here tells me all I really need to know about Naomi. She was a great mother-in-law. You couldn't tell a mother-in-law joke about Naomi because it doesn't seem like they applied. These women loved her. And so at this moment where they're going to separate and go their different ways, there was some real pain there. And so verse 10 goes on. It says, No, they said, we want to go with you to your people. But Naomi replied, Why should you go with me? Can I still give birth to any other sons who could grow up to be your husbands? No. My daughters, return to your parents' homes, for I am too old to marry again. And even if it were possible, and I were to get married tonight and bear sons, then what? Would you wait for them to grow up and refuse to marry someone else? No, of course not, my daughters. Things are far better for me than for you, because the Lord himself has raised his fist against me. This is what she believed, because she lost her husband and her sons. Verse 14, and again they wept together, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. Orpah said goodbye. Now, as I read the rest of this is not an indictment on Orpah. The truth of the matter is it made sense. But Orpah was leaving was leaving Naomi. Not for Naomi's good, but for Orpah's good. She said, listen, you're right. Everything made sense. You can't do anything for me anymore. And you're going to take me to Judah. Now I'm reading a lot in here, but that's just the way things were. See, Orpah understood she was going to be an outsider among Naomi's people. She understood that people were going to look down on them. She understood that widows in general had a rough time, let alone go to another country where you didn't have any connection. And so Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. But Ruth, who understood all this stuff as well, clung tightly to Naomi. Look, Naomi said to Ruth, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. You should do the same. In other words, you need to go back to your people. I understand what it is. When we think about it, if anybody understood what it was to be a foreigner in a country, Naomi left Judah, came to Moab. She knew how hard it was going to be. He says, you need to go back. I have nothing for you. But verse 16 and 17, which is where I want you to focus for the rest of our time together, is, but Ruth replied, don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us. And when Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she said nothing more. So the two of them continued on their journey. And when they came to Bethlehem, the entire town was excited by their arrival. Is it really Naomi, they asked? Naomi was coming back to her people. They didn't say, is Ruth with her? They didn't say, where's Orpah? Where's Orpah and Ruth? They said, Naomi is here. She's back. We're excited to embrace Naomi, even though Naomi was a widow in her own right. And what we see here is that Ruth had chosen her people. The choice that Ruth made tells us a lot about Ruth. It tells us that she was loyal. It tells us that she loved deeply, that she also understood that sometimes family is not blood. I'm not saying that the blood relatives aren't important, but what I am saying is that spiritual relatives have more in common and need each other more than blood relatives do sometimes. See, you could be a follower of Christ and nobody else in your family accept Jesus Christ as their Savior. That's a pretty lonely existence. Not that you don't enjoy your family. You do. You go to the reunions. You do all the stuff that they do. You catch up and you love them. But at the end of the day, you realize there's a significant difference. And sometimes that's a grief that's hard to bear. But Ruth chose her people. Orpah chose to find her people. There's nothing wrong with that. But what she did was for her. But Ruth decided she wanted to serve Naomi. You see, when we choose God's people for our lives, there's no shortage of joy and authentic living. The rest of the story is weird. So they go to Judah, and Ruth goes out into the fields, and there was a deal there where if you didn't have anything and you were poor, that you could follow along behind the people that were gathering for the harvest, and you could pick up whatever they dropped. And so in order to help Naomi survive, because she was a widow, she didn't have anybody to take care of her, Ruth went out to the fields. She came to a field of a guy by the name of Boaz. He was a very rich guy. He was related actually to Naomi, and she didn't know it at the time, but she began to follow after the harvesters. And if you've been following the news, you know the whole Me Too movement, and the way that women have been treated in our society by people of power. That was something that happened even in this time. And so Ruth was from Moab. She was a widow. Nobody knew her, and she was poor on top of that. And so there was quite a bit of probably ridicule. There was probably quite a bit of harassment that was taking place. And so Boaz came to the field, and he looked, and he went to each one of his workers, and he shook their hand, and he told them how wonderful it was that they were working and doing the things they were working. And then she caught his eye because she was beautiful. Who's that person? Well, that's Ruth. She's a Moab person. She's followed Naomi here. And so right off the top, Boaz says, you know what? Don't bother her. Men, let her follow you. Later, he goes to Ruth, and as he talks to her, and she tells him what she's doing there, and the fact that she has followed Naomi here, he takes it a step further, and he tells his foreman, he says, not only do I want you to leave her alone and not give her a hard time, if she follows, if she gets up with the people who are actually doing the harvesting, don't stop her. Let her fill her baskets. And then eventually they fall in love because she sees the heart of Ruth as Ruth does everything that she does through the rest of the story for her family. And then Boaz talks to a guy who's the actual next person in line to marry Naomi, and kind of tricks him. It's a fascinating story. You need to read it. And then takes her as his wife. And then she becomes a grandma to a guy by the name of Jesse, the father of King David, in the line, in the lineage of Jesus Christ. Why? Because she chose her people. Naomi was her person. Not because of what Naomi could give to her, not because of what Naomi could do for her, not because she didn't have anything to give to her. Because she loved Naomi. When the world began to crash down, there was nothing else. They were each other's person. Can you believe that there are some of us who simply believe that we don't need people? We don't need our person? You believe that there are churches out there that believe that they're the only church in Christianity that's getting it right and they don't need anybody else? Can you believe that we own the church because of what we do? And the church exists because of what it can do for us? Do you see how that's completely foreign? Can you see why maybe the church in America has lost its influence? It's because the church's people have got it all wrong. See, the reality is over the last few weeks, we've talked about this idea that we want to save nothing for the next life, that we want to make sure that the standard for today isn't the same standard isn't the standard from yesterday. We've talked about this idea that we need to discover that life was never intended to be all about me, and today I'm convinced that we also need to discover that we need our people. See, when it comes down to it, when we find our people and we get strength from our people, that strength we don't get so that everything feels wonderful. We get that strength so that we can continue the mission of God. I'm all about making people feel good. I love it. I love it when I make people feel good. But I'm more about helping them to achieve their mission. Because is there a better feeling in the world than when you've achieved the mission that God has for you? Is there a better feeling in the world than when you look at your people and you realize that you've accomplished something that's beyond you? I told you before, one of the things that I've been able to do, had the privilege of doing, is leading a church to open a coffee shop. And the whole idea of opening the coffee shop, we got a lot of grief from that, just to be honest, off the top. And I had people leave the church over it. Because we were talking about we're gonna open this coffee shop downtown, and I had people come and say, well, why are we opening a church there, and having church services downtown? We got a church right here people need to come to. And as I began to talk a little bit about, hey, this is just a way for us to go out and to be the church and to accomplish the mission that God has for us, man, it just fell on deaf ears. And they left the church. They told everybody in town what a rotten church we were. They told everybody in town I kind of bought into this secular idea of things, and I've been called a lot of things, and it was all because we opened a coffee shop in downtown with the vision that every single cent of the profit that we would receive, we were going to give to a charity in town. We weren't going to take anything from that, and that was the biggest sticking point for a lot of people, was we're not getting anything out of that. And then when they left, and every time we had to go to the church board and ask for money to keep that thing afloat, which we had to do for several years, that got back to them. And they were with other people at that point, and they were saying, oh, I'm so glad I left that place. They're hemorrhaging, they're not doing anything, they're not doing anything good, and you know what? They would have just stuck with being the type of church they're supposed to be and do the stuff that they're supposed to do, then they wouldn't be struggling with all of this. And the funny thing was, through all of that and all of that negativity, the church grew. The funny thing about all of that is not only did the church grow, we weren't getting people weren't leaving churches and coming to our church. There were people that were coming off of the street because they had gone to a coffee shop and had a cup of coffee and had a conversation with somebody there that said, hey, the church opened this for you. And that every dime that they make, money-wise, they're giving to charities. Now, they haven't made any money yet. And here was one of the funny things, is that somebody came and said, I couldn't believe that you were still operating a coffee shop and you were going in the hole thousands of dollars, but you were sticking with it. Now hear me, this is important. See, the coffee shop didn't have anything to give to us, but we stuck with it because we understood what our mission was. For the first time, I think in 5 or 6 years, they posted a profit just a couple months ago. I'm long gone from that scene. I'm so glad I don't have to be part of those business meetings anymore. Hey, we need $5,000, we need $7,000. We even needed $15,000 one time to keep it open. For the first time, they posted a profit. And it was a significant profit. And they were able to give it to a ministry in town. Actually, they even had a little bit left over where they had adopted the local community college, the basketball team. there, and there was 3 students around Christmas break who were going to have to stay in the dorms over Christmas because they didn't have money to go home to see their family. And on a Sunday morning, they were able to give them checks, or actually tickets, round trip, to go home, to be with their family and come back. Here's the real funny thing. As the church continued to grow, and some of the people that left and found other people, and then other people would talk about what great things the church was doing, they came back as if it was their idea. I don't care about that. I'm glad they came back. But why did they have to leave? Why did it take the church actually becoming the church to convince them that that was where they needed to be? What if we decided that the people of Broken Arrow Nazarene Church were our people? What if, as we look around, we decided that the people that are around us are the ones that we're going to give our life to, even when it doesn't seem like we're going to get anything back? What if we as the Church of the Nazarene Broken Arrow just decided it was okay if all we got from each other was the idea that we have somebody on mission with us? Hence your arrowhead. I've been looking for arrowheads for months. It's a joke. I didn't find these. You can laugh. It's all right. We ordered them. Everybody have your arrowhead? Pull it out. How many of you took a long time picking that arrowhead out? Some of you did? Had to be the right color? Well, I hate to disappoint you, but it's not your arrowhead. What if, instead of deciding that church was here to serve me, we decided that we were going to find our people? What if we decided that instead of going through this life believing that the church's main objective is to be an institution that serves me, we decided that we were going to serve each other, our people. And in serving each other, go out and serve the rest of the world. What I wanted you to do in a moment is I want you to take this arrowhead, and John and them are going to come and they're going to play as we're getting ready to do this. And I want you to find your person. And I want you to walk up to them, and I want you to give them your arrowhead. And they're going to give you theirs. Lynn, you're my person. Just really quickly, when I said, Lynn, you're my person, what did you feel? There's a joy there. To go to somebody, and what I really want to do is I want you to maybe go to somebody you don't know that well and say, Terry, you're my person. So when we go to people and we make them our person and we don't make them the enemy, and we make them a co-laborer in this thing we call life, man, things change. I have a review coming up in a few weeks in March, and I'm just going to be honest with you, I'm not interested in leading an institution. Sorry. I'm not interested in furthering Christian pop culture. But if you'll let me, I'll be your person. If you'll let me, you can be my person.